Happy 5784. I'm Stephanie Singer. I'm the Director of Arts and Ideas, and on behalf of the JCCSF, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's program, Shabbat, with Adeena, Sussman, and Guy Raz. We are so happy to see you. Thank you so much for coming. For nearly 150 years, the JCCSF has been woven into the amazing tapestry of San Francisco civic life. Urban and inclusive, JCCSF is a community that welcomes everyone, using the power of gathering to share, inspire, support, and restore. JCCSF celebrates Jewish culture, which asks us to make our world a better place in ways big and small, to learn and to teach, and to appreciate each moment. How fitting then to welcome Adeena, Sussman, and Guy Raz to our stage. Jewish wisdom also emphasizes the practice of gratitude, so a few thank yous are in order before we begin. Thank you to our community partners, One Table and Acme Breads. And also our thanks go to our bookstore partner, Omnivore Books, the Bay Area's only culinary bookshop, for providing your copies of Shabbat. Yay. Yay. Adeena is happy to personalize and sign your books in the atrium immediately following the conversation, and Omnivore will have additional copies of Shabbat for sale, so please stick around for that. After you get your book signed, I encourage you to take a few moments to check out our new exhibition in the Kat Snyder Gallery on the second floor, Magical Thinking, Superstitions, and Other Persistent Notions, which brings together over 20 contemporary artists to reveal the history, scope, and importance of magical thinking in Judaism. And finally, for those of you wanting even more Jewish food inspo, allow me to draw your attention to a couple upcoming culinary programs that we think you'll enjoy. Next week, October 3rd, we welcome nice Jewish boy Jake Cohen, who will be dishing his new cookbook, I Could Nosh, with our very own Maggid, Joe Singer. And then on Thursday, October 26th, Leah Koenig, author of the new cookbook Portico, joins Kefiko's chef David Nayfeld for a conversation about cooking and feasting in Rome's Jewish kitchen. You can purchase tickets online for these and other upcoming arts and ideas events on our website, jccsf.org. And now onto our program. Jewish culinary guru Adeena Sussman grew up in the Bay Area and since 2015 has made Tel Aviv her home. Adeena is what we call a macher in the Jewish food world. She's co-authored over a dozen cookbooks, including 3 bestsellers with Chrissy Teigen. Her last cookbook, Sababa, was her first solo cookbook, and it was a best-selling hit. It was all about the joy and diversity of the communities that live in Israel. And her new one, for which she's here this evening to discuss, Shabbat, is about the gatherings, rituals, iconic dishes, and the celebration of rest that is the Sabbath. Joining Adeena on stage this evening is Guy Raz, award-winning author, reporter, radio and podcast host and creator. His shows include How I Built This, The Great Creators, Wow in the World, Wisdom from the Top, and several others. He's been described by the New York Times as, quote, one of the most popular podcasters in history. And his podcasts have a combined monthly audience of more than 19 million downloads. Please join me in giving Adeena and Guy a warm welcome back to the JCCSF.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
So nice to see you here tonight. So great to be here with Adeena. I had a chance to hang out with you, with Adeena, in Tel Aviv in April, and we'll talk about this, but let me just say that walking through Carmel Market with Adeena Sussman is it's like walking through the U.S. with the Beatles in 1965. It's absolutely amazing, and it just, every door opens up. Adeena, you welcome home. You are here in your home turf. You grew up here in the Bay Area.
Bay Area.
Yeah.
Yes, I grew up in Palo Alto. I have some Palo Alto friends here tonight.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's always great to be back in Palo Alto, San Francisco. Loving this cold weather. Thank you.
It's the best,
Still
right?
90 in Tel Aviv, so I'm enjoying it a lot.
So we'll get to how you got to Israel, but let's talk about Palo Alto for a moment.
Sure.
You grew up in an observant home.
I did. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home in a place where there weren't many others like us, and it definitely was defining in the way that my cooking, my Jewish identity, and of course Shabbat, and sort of the bubble that created for my family. And it definitely set us apart from other people, even other Jewish people in Palo Alto.
Because you were really observant. You didn't turn on the lights.
We no lights. I mean, when I say no technology, this was the 1970s, so there wasn't a lot of technology. But, no lights, no driving, no spending money, no television. And I eventually went to public high school. And on Monday mornings, people would walk up to me in school and say, I saw you walking down El Camino Real all dressed up. Did your car break down? Nobody understood. The idea that we walked by choice was, unfathomable to people in Palo Alto. But it was the normal for me. It was what I knew. I love the way I was raised, and it instilled so many amazing things in me. And even though I'm no longer Orthodox, a lot of that has stuck with me.
Tell me about food at home when you were growing up. I mean, food, of course, is a central part of most Jewish homes in some ways.
Yes.
But, and imagine that was the case for you, especially if Shabbat, if the whole week sort of revolved around that moment.
For sure. I mean, there was sort of a lead up to Shabbat, especially because based on traditional Jewish law, there was no actual cooking going on once the sun went down on Friday night. So, it was like the final countdown, once we lit candles, everything was in place, either on a hot plate or ready to be reheated or to be served at room temperature. And, often found my mother cooking on Wednesdays and Thursdays because she worked. So I would wake up to beautiful aromas, like cooling on the stovetop. And it was a pretty traditional, as we like to say, Ashkenormative.
So cholent.
There was cholent in the winter. There was always a roast chicken. My mother's famous vegetable kugel, which is in the Shabbat cookbook, which is a lightened up take on a potato kugel that has like shredded zucchini and carrots in it as well. Delicious soup. But, I just want to say that, even though this was Northern California, we weren't kind of the platonic sort of Alice Waters ideal kind of a kitchen. Like I didn't know what butter was until I went to my friend Molly Foy's house and had butter at room temperature with bread at dinner sometime. Ooh. We were a margarine household.
Right, you had to be.
My mother said margarine was Switzerland. Right. It could be served dairy, it could be served meat, so margarine was Switzerland.
We had margarine too. Everybody had margarine back then. That was,
and garlic powder,
Garlic powder. I still use garlic powder.
Yeah, of course. Garlic powder is great. And my mother's Shabbat chicken, which is a wonderful recipe where you sort of place cut up chicken over a lot of onions and the chicken schmaltz renders into the onions. There's just a raft of dried spices all over that recipe. Onion powder, garlic powder, paprika. And it's salt, pepper, and it's so delicious. And it kind of creates like a paste or a coating on the chicken. So, there's a place for all of those traditional things in my book. And I found myself going back to those taste memories sort of as a starting point for telling the stories that I wanted to tell in the book. I felt like I needed to go and nail those and also put my own spin on them.
So from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, the oven was set to 250?
The oven was set. And we also, very controversial, but my mother kept a gas flame on all of Shabbat.
Right.
Don't call social services.
Yeah, that's right.
But, so she had like a metal...
hot plate.
Or sometimes not. And, her cholent, in Israel... Cholent, which is the long-cooked stew that cooks anywhere from 12 to 24 hours before being dramatically opened to see what's in the pot. She cooked hers on the stovetop.
Oh, not in the oven.
On a super low flame. So that was always there in her giant Farberware, the Farberware pot with the black plastic handles and the little top.
Yeah.
But yes, also the oven was set. And later on, we had a more sophisticated oven that had like a Shabbat timer setting.
Yeah.
But every week, my mother would put broccoli in the microwave before Shabbat and forget that it was in there. And at Shabbat dinner, she would say, I forgot the broccoli. And she couldn't open the microwave because there was a light in it. So we would have to wait until after Shabbat to open the microwave and take out the poor, sad, oxidized broccoli, throw it away, and start over again the next week. But yeah, so things were heated. And also something I learned early on was the joys of serving food at room temperature.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's way better to just let something come to its natural temperature than to sort of heat it within an inch of its life again for a second time,
Yeah.
And
When you were a teenager,
yeah.
You probably helped in the kitchen, right?
I helped from a really young age because my mom was a teacher,
Yeah.
and sometimes my sister and I would get home from school, and she taught ESL at a college level, and on her way home, she would call us and say, we got our kosher meat once a month delivered to the synagogue in the neighborhood, and we would bring it home, and we had a whole freezer for kosher meat and several fridges for kosher cheese because we sold kosher cheese to the Northern Californian community. Some people here probably bought it. That's a whole nother story.
That's another story, yeah.
Yes. I did a podcast called Schmaltzy where I told the live story. So if you want to look it up, you can find it there.
All right.
But yeah, so she would call us and say, take the meat out, or, separate some eggs for me because I want to make meringue cookies for Shabbat. Or, we don't have any parchment paper, but take a brown paper bag from Lucky's and cut around. And shockingly, the brown bag fit perfectly on the sheet pan.
Wow.
And worked wonderfully instead of parchment
paper. Try that.
Hot tip.
Yeah.
So we were helping a lot, and because we also were kosher and we're in an area where you couldn't purchase a lot of things, we were really making everything, all the challahs, all the desserts. There was no Shabbat takeaway, for us. So I had a real familiarity and comfort level in the kitchen, and we had 2 cookbooks that were sort of the pillars of our kitchen. One, because my mother came from a home where cooking was not really valued. Her mother had been taken out of school during the Depression to cook and clean for her family, so she viewed cooking as a chore. So my mother grew up with that, and also not in a very Jewish-centric home. So my mother had a Chabad cookbook called Spice and Spirit, and the New York Times cookbook.
Nice.
And so those are both, my sister and I are in possession of those 2 books, and the pages of the New York Times cookbook where I made my chocolate layer cake with 8 sticks of margarine in the frosting, is very well stained. And those are the 2 books that we cooked from and learned from.
You did not intend to be a food person at all. I think you went to Boston University, right?
I went to BU, I studied communications, and I moved to Israel after college and worked in television, both in production and program acquisitions. And I was cooking with my roommates. We were making Shabbat dinners and having a lot of people over, but it slowly dawned on me that this was something that I was really passionate about and that was capturing my attention all the time.
Food.
Yes. I was reading cookbooks like novels, from an early age. When I traveled, I was just interested in the markets and in Israel too, is, where I first discovered true market seasonal cooking in Jerusalem in the 1990s.
And at that time, Mahane Yehuda was much different than it is
Mahane
today.
Yehuda was, it was
a real food market.
It was, now the Carmel market where I live is
much more,
more authentic, one would say. And then from there, my food career sort of evolved over time, and it was at the time when food media was really developing, and obviously with the advent of the internet, and all those things came together, and there were viable career options for people who wanted to work sort of at the intersection of writing and cooking, and those were always my 2 areas of interest.
So this is the 90s. You went to culinary school.
I went to culinary school after working at Gourmet Magazine for 3 years.
You first came back to New York.
I came back to New York. I was temping at a pharmaceutical company and freelancing as a food writer in New York. I had a wonderful boss at Pfizer who didn't have a lot of work for me and really helped encourage my culinary freelance career until someone caught on to both of us and I got let go. And he was really into food too.
Yeah.
So, and then I eventually found my way to Gourmet Magazine during the era of Ruth Reichel. And that was a wonderful time to be there. I was on the marketing side of the magazine, but I was writing a lot of beautiful copy and learning the food world from the inside. And eventually, when I left Gourmet, I got an assignment from Ruth and an editor to write an article about Yemenite Jewish cooking in Israel. And that was the article that sort of launched my freelance career.
Wow.
So and then when I left Gourmet, I went to culinary school in 2004.
Tell me about that decision to go to culinary school. I mean, was it because you were writing about food and you felt like you wanted that formal sort of foundation?
It was a few things. I mean, I I was a little older and I was pretty focused on what I wanted to do. At that point, I kind of had the idea that cookbooks were going to be important in my professional life. And I also wanted to draw a line in the sand between my marketing writing career at Gourmet and sort of to something to really take me over to the creative side. So I decided to go to culinary school because it had always been a dream. Although if people ask me now if they should go to culinary school, I usually say no. It's very expensive, and especially for a young person right out of college, most people who go to culinary school end up working on the line in a kitchen for $9 an hour and in debt, like $100,000 in debt. So I always just say, please just go work in a restaurant for a year or two, or intern at that magazine, or try and start your own Instagram account, develop your stuff, and then if you want to go later, go later. I was in a position where I had been working, I had saved money, I could afford to go to school. And I don't regret the decision, but I still think that, 20 years later, I'd say 95% of what I learned, I've learned on the job.
Yeah.
I'm a home cook for home cooks. I don't even
Yes.
call myself a chef.
Yeah.
To me, a chef is someone who runs a professional kitchen in the traditional French brigade system with
Yeah.
stations. And, I'm the grill master, the saucier, the cold garde-manger,
Yeah.
the dessert
The
person.
prep-
I do
prep
all
line
of it.
cook, prep
the
chef,
prep
yep,
cook,
yep.
So, and I'm proud to call myself a cook.
Yeah.
It's not like false humility. It's a different orientation
Yeah.
and a different type of work that I'm doing. Like, these books are for you.
Yeah.
And what a chef does is incredible, and it's something that's done on a stage every night in a
Right.
restaurant. So it's
Right,
different.
and with all due respect to Alinea, if you bought the Alinea cookbook, it's very hard to make that at home.
Right.
But if
Yeah.
you buy one of these cookbooks, you can do this, you can reproduce this.
Yeah, the idea is to, decode recipe profiles and techniques in a way that makes them not just doable, but fun for the home cook.
Yeah.
And, my whole idea with the way that I write recipes is they're very conversational in style. Like, I'm talking to my cooks and reassuring them through the process. There are a lot of parentheses that say, don't worry if this happens, or, give yourself an extra minute before you panic about XYZ. And also, I like the idea that people are being taught with learning without feeling like they're being taught.
Yeah.
There's a lot of education in the recipes without a lot of sort of pedantic content.
Yeah. How did you get into writing cookbooks? Because you started as a sort of a
Yeah.
ghostwriter or collaborator.
Yeah, so when I got out of school, I got a really great opportunity. Don't you guys like how this is kind of turning into how I built this? Which is what I was kind of hoping would happen. Like, this is like my dream come true, so thank you, Guy. Really. So, I kept seeing this woman's name, Melissa Clark, on all the cookbooks that I was reading. And I was like,
Yeah.
who is this woman and why is her name on every cookbook that I like?
Yeah.
And that's when I learned that cookbook co-authoring was a job. And I was like, I might be good at this job. I like to collaborate. I've always liked to help other people realize their visions. I know how to cook, I know how to write. And so I kind of set that as a goal, but the first work that I got out of culinary school was developing recipes for a woman named Ellie Krieger, who had a healthy cooking show on the Food Network. And she took me on we hit it off personally, and we
Yeah.
lived in the same neighborhood. So I started working with her to develop recipes for her books, and I worked with her on her subsequent 5 cookbooks, purely on developing recipes. I didn't
Wow.
write the text. Wasn't involved in the sort of
Just coming up with
coming up
ideas.
with flavors and ideas and figuring out how to make them happen. And it was such a great education for me. And through my work with Ellie, I started writing magazine features, recipe features for magazines, back in the day when there were 15 culinary magazines a month,
Yes.
you could make a living, pitching stories like 5 ways with mushrooms or, Passover feast, that kind of thing. And I think that as Epicurean magazines have kind of disappeared, cookbooks have actually ascended and
Yes.
replaced them in some ways, because think about it, it's a really inexpensive entry point to someone's entire culinary world and viewpoint. It has 100 recipes minimum, usually, each with its own beautiful photograph.
Yeah.
And a story arc, that you can't find on the internet.
Yeah.
And so I think that people ask why the cookbook market is so robust. It's because it's a really inexpensive and enjoyable tactile experience to
Totally.
hold a cookbook and to pour through its pages. So I eventually was lucky enough to get connected with an agent who immediately connected me with my first cookbook, which was the cookbook expression of a Seventh-day Adventist's very popular heirloom seed catalog, the Baker Creek seed catalog. They're in your part of the world, and this kid around the time of the millennium thought that people might want to buy seeds if the world came to an end.
Yes.
And he sold like $200,000 worth of seeds between November 1999 and January 2000.
Wow.
And he developed this whole, and then I got connected with these people,
Wow.
And I walked into my first meeting, in my like blazer with my laptop in Manhattan, and was sitting in this big office, and in walked this guy like in dirty overalls. And so that was my first book, and I really enjoyed co-authoring cookbooks, and I co-authored a lot. And until I got to Chrissy Teigen, who I've been working with since 2014, and we've written 3 New York Times bestselling cookbooks together. And in that time, I met my husband Jay and Chrissy Teigen in the same month, so it was a big month. And I started spending more time in Israel, and I had been writing about Israeli food and wine for a long time.
Yeah.
My food writing career and Israeli food's kind of prominence sort of were like going lockstep together, for about 10 years. And people had suggested that I might want to write an Israeli cookbook, but I always felt that unless I was living there, I might be considered a little bit of an interloper or a dilettante. And then I met my now husband, Jay, who's American-Israeli and had been living there for a long time. And I moved over there and started spending more time there in 2015. And I wrote Sababa, which came out in 2019.
Yeah,
and
such a good book.
And here we are. and in a full circle moment, Melissa Clark wrote Sababa onto the New York Times Best Fall Cookbooks of 2019. So it's kind of like my idol anointing
amazing.
my book, and that was like an amazing moment for me.
Well deserved. It's well thumb-eared or dog-eared on my shelf. I want to go back for a moment because you have a very good friend, Michael Solomonov, who many of you know his restaurant, Zahav in Philadelphia, and his other restaurants, an amazing chef and great restaurants.
And a great person.
He writes about how, in his careers, he was cooking French food and Italian food, and he was sort of, he was kind of, flailing a little bit until he sort of asked himself, why am I not cooking the food of my culture, my background? And that really was transformational for him.
Sure.
When you started to write about food,
Yeah.
were you writing about Israeli and Jewish food, or were you wanting to write about everything?
I was really into it all. I didn't really see my career evolving in this direction until I moved to Israel. I was something that I always focused on and enjoyed writing about, but I was also, I went to Italy with Anita Lowe and wrote an amazing article about making pasta with her and truffle hunting in Italy. I have a wide range of culinary interests. But, I had an opportunity, and it was my life experience evinced in the pages of a book. Sababa was really the story of my acculturation into Israel through my daily walks through the Carmel market and using the market as a mirror for the immigrant culinary experience in Israel and how an outsider in a culinary culture integrates through learning about food. And so I just it happened naturally, and then also Instagram kind of happened at the same time, and people just were really interested in my daily life in the market and in Israel, and so it just kind of all happened very organically. And now I think it would be hard for me to write a book about the truffle hunting in Italy.
Right.
And I really enjoy being having the opportunity to present. Sort of my books are kind of like the Venn diagram of where my Jewish identity, my Israeli identity, and my culinary identity all kind of meet in the middle.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of fun exploring that through my books. And Sababa was the beginning of that journey, and this book definitely goes there because it's really a combination of my childhood cooking life combined with my modern Israeli cooking life and all the people that I had the privilege of cooking with who imparted their recipes to me for the book. And so it's something that I get to share with the world, and also it deepens my own knowledge, experience, and kind of like there's always some like really nice internal reconciliation going on for me.
So let's talk about Israeli food. All right, because when you arrived there, I mean, this was really the kind of the beginning of a wave. I mean, you had
Yeah.
Ottolenghi
Yep.
and Michael Solomonov, and there are others,
Yes.
of course, but Ottolenghi became
Ottolenghi,
global.
yes, he's a
kind
global
of
brand.
Brand, right?
Yes.
And
he's amazing.
And his books are incredible.
Yes.
What did you discover when you moved there? I mean, you're walking the Carmel market, and it's amazing because you hear
Yeah.
Hebrew, Arabic, Russian. You hear Hebrew spoken with an Arab, with a sort of a
Yeah.
Mizrahi accent. You
Yep.
hear all kinds of Ethiopian, Amharic. I mean,
Yeah,
Thai.
Eritrean asylum seekers who aren't even
It's
Jewish. working in the
unbelievable.
market.
Just the
yeah.
just the voices you hear and the. So you get there, you're walking through this market, and it must have been revelatory.
It was, I'd only ever visited there. I was much more familiar with the Machne Yehuda market because
Yeah.
I had lived in Jerusalem, and I had really, bopped through the Carmel market a few times. But once I started living there, the first few weeks that I was living near the Shuk, I think they thought, like, who's this nice lady who's, like, probably renting
And
an Airbnb?
by the way, how was your Hebrew? Was it
My Hebrew, my Hebrew was pretty good.
was pretty good, yeah.
Because I lived in Israel for 5 years after college
Right.
and worked with all Israelis in what I call a 5-year Israeli Hebrew hazing ritual.
Yeah.
It was like me and 200 Israelis,
Right.
basically. So
Yeah.
my Hebrew got pretty good. Now it's better, and I'm also a really good faker. I have an excellent accent.
Nice.
So, like, it makes up for a lot of
And
my...
probably helpful in the market, even though
Yeah.
everyone speaks English
My
there.
culinary Hebrew is good.
Yeah.
My food Hebrew is good.
All right, so you get to the
So
market.
I got to the market and I discovered also, like, I realized that all these other chefs who were writing Israeli cookbooks had Israeli heritage, but were living abroad. And I was the opposite. I was a 100% purebred
Yeah.
Eastern European American Jew who was living as now an Israeli citizen. So it was
Yeah.
kind of the inverse equation, and that I might have something unique to offer to people through that perspective. And I just found a wealth of stories, history, culinary heritage, sense of humor, also like learning all about the different religious calendars in Israel through being in the shuk. When there's a Muslim holiday, you realize how many Muslims work in the shuk or deliver all the food to the shuk.
Yeah.
When, my friend Alam, who works at the Asian produce shop, had a charcoal cross on his forehead
Wednesday.
because he was an Eritrean asylum seeker and was a Coptic Christian. I didn't know that Eritreans were Coptic Christians. So, every day that I was there, I was learning something new about Israel and about its multicultural nature, and of course, the amazing food traditions there. So that's kind of how it evolved. And, I also really relish the opportunity to go cook with people in their homes. And
Yeah.
Israelis are extremely open-hearted and welcoming about, they're very flattered if you ask them that you tell them you want to learn their recipes. Like, they will invite you. Americans, I feel like they'll invite you, but like, then you have to invite yourself,
Yeah.
There, like, they invite me, I say, what time should I show up? And it happens like within a week or two. And there are a lot of amazing stories in the book of me going to cook with people in their homes. There are recipes of Uzbeki background, which is, Bukharan Jewish.
Yeah.
There's Ethiopian recipes that I learned with my friend Fanta. There are Libyan cholents and Moroccan dishes and Italian. There's an Italian livornese fish stew. There's a Mexican gefilte fish. My friend Luis Cruz, who is a Oaxacan who married a Jewish woman, converted and moved to Israel and owns Israel's best taqueria, which is kosher and in Jerusalem.
Wow.
He and his family taught me how to make their tomatillo sauced homemade gefilte fish. So
Wow.
there are just so many incredible stories in the book, and just it's amazing to be able to document them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about Israeli food for a moment.
Sure.
When I was a kid, my grandmother lived in Jerusalem. I used to go there as a kid and would spend a couple weeks with her in the summer. And she was from Galicia, right? Like so many Jews, and came in the in the 20s. And and the food that she would cook was like stuffed cabbage with tomato sauce, or schnitzels, or
chopped liver.
some of that. Or she had one of those presses where she'd put the bread and the yellow cheese and press
Like a toast maker.
right? And that was what. But I hadn't been to Israel in 17 years since when I arrived, when I came in April, and it was kind of mind blowing to just see all of these different foodways meet and gather in Tel Aviv, but all over the country.
Yeah, and the common denominator is just freshness. Like,
Yeah.
when we went through the shuk for the day, when you eat hummus in Tel Aviv, it's made, served, and then they close, and
done.
that's it. There's no leftovers,
Yeah.
there's no holdovers for the next day. The bread is a one-day affair. It gets thrown away or given to charity. Like, it's not held over for the next day. And all the cultures share that passion for freshness. But yes, like within a, few block radius of my home is, some of the best falafel in Israel, some of the best Yemenite soups, some of the best hummus, Irit, who makes the
Yes.
incredible pancakes with the egg for crispy for breakfast, juices, my amazing coffee shop, Cafe Tomati, so it's all right there. And, what's interesting about Israeli food is that the founders of the state of Israel were mostly Eastern European Ashkenazi
Yes.
Jews, and Mizrahi and Sephardic culture were kind of put on the back burner
Yes.
for the first 20, 30 years. But since the late 70s, early 80s, those are the ascendant cultures. Pop music, movie stars, TV stars, and food.
Food, yes.
And so
Yeah.
Sababa is really heavily influenced by those cuisines because that was also my learning curve,
Yeah.
So this book is a little bit more of a blend of the two, but it's true. When you go to Israel, you're just getting like such a United Nations of spices and techniques and traditions and cultures, like all mixed together. And I'd say the common denominators are spiciness, citrus,
Yeah.
and freshness. Like those to me are like the
And what's
defining
remarkable, and
characteristics.
I mean, so many of the things are remarkable about the sort of just eating your way through Tel Aviv, but one
Yeah.
of the things is, or two of them are, the first is it's mostly plant-based. And
Yes.
that's the first thing that struck me. And the second thing is the quality of food and the effort made virtually everywhere you go is really high. Like if you go to a hole-in-the-wall pizza place or Italian place, they're making the pasta and the sauce.
And a breakfast sandwich is, made on freshly baked bread
Yeah.
with egg salad is probably made there. Mickey at my coffee shop makes his own breakfast sandwiches. Imagine
Yeah.
like every Starbucks making their own breakfast sandwiches.
Yeah, I was.
It blows your mind.
Yeah.
And you can taste it. You can really taste it, and it's a value in
Yeah.
Israel, and it also carries over into home cooking. People put on their best for guests when they come over.
Yeah.
And like the food is fresh. Leftovers are not a huge thing in Israel unless
Yeah.
it's like a stew or a long cooked thing. Israeli salad, like sort of the, also called Arab salad or Shirazi salad if you're Persian, just the chopped vegetables, it has like a limited shelf life. So like they make it, eat it, and start over again.
Yeah.
Michael Solomonov's a genius, so he took the juice from the Israeli salad and put it into a martini.
Yeah.
And calls it an Israeli salad martini, and it's
Yeah.
amazing. And I have, in this book, I have a martini that uses both feta brine and olive brine. Because I don't, and it's really salty and really fun, and I just always have so much feta in the house, and I wanted to find a way to use that brine.
By the way, 20 years ago, I covered for NPR, when I used to work for NPR, I was a reporter, I covered Kosovo, Serbia, Macedonia. In Macedonia, it's called a Macedonian salad. In Kosovo, it's called the Kosovar
Exactly.
salad. In Serbia, it's called, and it's the same salad. Israeli salad, Palestinian salad.
Exactly.
It's Greek salad, it's the same salad.
Chopped salad.
It's tomatoes, cucumbers, and a slight variation, maybe red onions, maybe some feta. It's
acid,
the same salad, yeah.
a little olive oil.
And everyone's like, no, this is a Macedonian salad. I said, I was just in Serbia. They call it Serbian salad.
Yeah, and I was in Georgia this summer, and we had the
Same
Georgian
thing.
salad. Just had
Yeah.
a few walnuts on the top. Same thing.
All right, so now
Yeah.
one of the wonderful things that we all get to do is we live in California, and we
Yes.
live in Northern California, so we have
Yes.
access to a lot of the same things that you cook with year round.
Right,
We have
that-
access to it, which means that we can make all this stuff. Tell me what. You mentioned how people take pride in having people over and making
Yeah.
these great meals. So what is Shabbat for you? What is it like for you? Like a
It can take like several iterations, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, one of the advantages we have in Israel is that Friday is not a traditional work day.
Yeah.
So, you can sort of be home based, even if you're doing a lot of things and running errands or meeting friends, you can kind of keep things going, as the day goes on. So like if I want to make a more traditional Shabbat dinner, I'll put up the challah dough in the morning and like maybe run out to the market, come back, braid the challah, then run out for a little brunch, come back, bake the challah, get the other food going. And sometimes I'll do like the traditional, like a roast chicken, but my roast chicken, has a paste of garlic confit.
Do you always have people over Friday night? Most Friday nights?
Very often.
Yeah.
We don't typically go out on Friday nights. Tel Aviv is alive on Friday night.
Oh, yeah.
People are going out.
Yeah.
But because of the way that I was raised, I stopped keeping Shabbat a while ago, but when I would go out on Friday night, I found that I was exhausted.
Yeah.
My body was hardwired for
needed
that
that
break.
break. Yeah.
And the whole idea
Yeah.
of the Havdalah, the break between the
Yeah.
week and the weekend, is very important. And I reinstated sort of Shabbat dinner. And sometimes we go to friends, but I like to be home based on a Friday night. And also most of Shabbat, I'm home, we're home cooking. So we'll have people over. It can be very planned or it can be very spontaneous.
Yeah.
Israelis, as you know, are very spontaneous. You could have no guests at 8 a.m. and have 10 guests by 8 p.m., depending on who's around and who's available. And especially because I live in an expat community, we have Israeli friends, but also we have a lot of American friends. Some people, most Israelis are going to their parents' or grandparents on Friday night for dinner. There's a family dinner.
Yeah.
And sometimes we end up having a lot of friends over, which is really, really nice. In the winter, there's always a cholent or a chamin at the center of it's a long cooked stew that there are about 5 or 6 different cholent, chamin, dafina recipes in the book. And I learned amazing things in the making of these, for this book. First of all, you mentioned my Ashkenazi cholent has pastrami in it.
I'm gonna try that.
And also my mother, God bless her, was an amazing cook. And she put a squeeze of ketchup in her cholent.
I mean Heinz chili sauce, right?
Ketchup is umami.
Yeah.
I don't put ketchup on my cholent, but I wanted to honor her tradition, so I put in some tomato paste, some garlic, some vinegar, a lot of the ingredients that are in ketchup to sort of
Yeah.
evoke those ketchup-y flavors
Yeah.
in the cholent. And she had our mothers were no dummies when it came to cooking. They knew what they were doing. So, so that one, and then there's one that has semolina dumplings that are shot through with lamb fat that are suspended in the chamin with a Swiss chard mixture. There's one that has an entire meatloaf inside the cholent that's ground meat and ground nuts and warm spices. It's called a ta'amar. It's a Moroccan dish. My husband calls these things toys, things that
Yeah.
are accessories. So there's usually some kind of a cholent on Shabbat. I like to have a large format main course and then a lot of fresh salads and things that go around it, you know. And I love the whole tradition of getting that stew on the stove before Shabbat. It really is genius. The heat and the time do the work for you.
Yeah.
And it sort of frees you up to maybe focus on some chopped fresh salads and other things, and and obviously always fresh challah.
I'm curious, and this is maybe a bit of an abstract question, but I was really struck by, and I think it's reflected in your book, by the difference between Jewish culture and Hebrew culture.
Very good question.
Right? And so how much of what you make is Jewish versus Hebrew / Israeli culture?
I would say in this book, maybe 15 to 20% of the recipes are Jewish. When you ask Israelis what Jewish food is, they always revert to those Ashkenazi recipes.
Yeah.
Ochel Yehudi to them is chopped liver, gefilte fish, chicken soup, gribenes and schmaltz,
Yeah.
rendered chicken skin.
Yeah.
That to them is Jewish food. Israeli food.
And that's not widely consumed in
No,
Israel.
it's kind of
Bagels are not a big deal there.
bagels are, the only people who are really eating bagels are Americans.
Yeah. And nobody's schmear, bagels, lox.
No one knows.
No one even
No,
knows
and
what that
cold-
is.
And pastrami, cold cuts, really
Yeah.
good. There's no Katz's Deli.
Right.
There's no
Yeah.
Ratner's. There's no these dairy
Maybe
restaurants.
we should open one there.
What?
We should open one there. Anyway, but yeah, there's none of that.
Amazing.
None of that there.
So I have a potato blintz recipe
Yeah.
with a mushroom cream sauce in the book. I have my grandmother's compote, which she called compost as a joke. But I take her recipe and I lighten it up a little bit. I add white wine and lemon juice and strips of lemon zest and freshly grated ginger to give it a little lift and some acid against all that sweetness and the stewed fruit with the sugar. So so that's how I present the Jewish recipes with a little twist. But the Israeli recipes or Hebrew recipes, as you say, are the ones that came from the ingathering of the exiles,
Yeah.
the multicultural, or even just ancient Jewish traditions that have, there's a stew, a flipped stew that's called chamin macaroni in the book. And macaroni just refers to noodles. It's not
Yeah.
macaroni shaped. It's you cook spaghetti, or they used to use other noodles in Jerusalem, in the 1800s, and you mix chicken pieces into cooked spaghetti with sautéed onions and spices, and you cook that for 16 hours, and it becomes this incredible thing that's something, the sum is so much greater than its parts, and it's so incredibly delicious. And that's, I'd say, a combination of Jewish and Hebrew, because, you know, it's something that came from an Ashkenazi tradition, but then like it got to Israel and it became local because of the way it was cooked and, you know, ingredients that were put in it.
As you know, everything in the Middle East is political, including food, right?
I don't know what you're
Everything.
talking about,
I know.
Guy.
And, you know, but even when you go to a quote-unquote Middle Eastern restaurant in the U.S., it's often described as a Greek restaurant or a Lebanese restaurant. So I'm curious, like, you know, and you know this, you know, there are plenty of people who say, well, they're, you know, what Israelis call Israeli food is not really Israeli. It comes from other places. It's appropriative, et cetera. What do you make of that?
I mean, you know, if we're really going there, you know, falafel is neither Palestinian nor Jewish. Hummus is neither Palestinian nor. Falafel is something that was originally made with fava beans and comes from Egypt. Hummus is Lebanese, you know. So, and you know, Palestinians and Jews actually share a lot as far as immigration and migration and like sharing, taking recipes, you know. So I don't want to get into like the provenance of recipes, but what I do want to say is that I feel like when we focus so much on where the food came from, we lose the deeper discussion about what the meaning of the food is.
And also the similarities between.
And the commonalities, and also just, you know, I want to know whether you're Jewish or Israeli or Palestinian, I want to know, like, how did your mother make this? What did this recipe mean to your family? Tell me your story of peregrination of your family throughout the last few hundred years, you know. I think Israelis are really good at packaging and marketing things. So Israelis saw an opportunity and took this food global. You know, it's gotten to the point where people say, I want to eat Italian tonight. I want to eat Mexican tonight. I want to eat French tonight. I want to eat Israeli tonight. You know, 10 years ago, that wasn't happening. Now you can get a shakshuka kit in Trader Joe's. So, you know, so we've really come somewhere. And, you know,
frozen shakshuka, I think.
Frozen shakshuka, but they have, you know, fresh zhug on the shelf. They have bamba. They have,
bamba
you know,
there,
so I think, you know, it's a combination of a lot of things. It's Israeli sort of startup culture. It's a lot of Israelis move abroad and sort of take their food with them. There are also some good Palestinian restaurants that are opening in different cities as well. I don't see it slowing down. You know, I think, first of all, like you said, a lot of the Israeli food is plant-based. It's relatively healthy. It's based on olive oil as opposed to like less healthy fats, tahina, which is like a superfood. You know, so there's the reasons why people are attracted to this food. You know, I mean, you were talking about how you spent all summer eating eggplant and tahina. Like, it's just
delicious.
So good. So
roasted
good.
eggplant tahina.
You know,
Amazing.
so I think food culture is one of Israel's like finest exports at the moment, and it's nice to be a part of it. It's interesting to actually be in Israel doing it. Like the books are my export, but I'm there, you know, and every day I'm kind of refining that balance of like, you know, I mean, sometimes I make mac and cheese because I grew up with that, and Jay wants that for dinner. It's
delicious.
You know, it's amazing, you know. So, but more often than not, what I'm doing is taking like homemade preserved lemons and like mixing them into something that maybe I made in the States and like putting my own spin on it to make it more local and Israeli. So
one of the things I loved about Sababa was those different foodways and the personality, the people we met and the characters we met, and you know, from all walks of life, Ethiopian Israelis and Palestinian Israelis and Christian and Muslim Israelis and Yemenite Jews and
and I do that here too. In
exactly. And so so tell me about how you compiled all of these different Shabbat traditions.
Right. So this book was a little different. You know, weirdly, the first people that I met in the food world in Israel were like more well-known chefs and people, just because I was a journalist and knew people. So I ended up cooking with a lot of them. This book, it was all about home cooks. And also, I really wanted to show people outside of Israel that Shabbat doesn't look a certain way. You know, half the country is religious and half the country is not religious. And, you know, there are essays, photo essays in the book about going into Bnei Brak, which is an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood, on Thursday night, and exploring the vibrant Shabbat food scene where you can go eat and take out Shabbat foods until 3 in the morning, and secular Israelis are going there and doing it, and it's really fun and cool. And then there are stories of preparing a traditional Shabbat with a religious family in Jerusalem. And then my stylist, Nurit Kariv, who's totally secular, has her family over for Shabbat brunch every Saturday. So, I wanted to show the variety, and also just for the outside world to see that Israel is not this monolithic culture. But the recipes themselves just kind of came through, people knew I was working on a book. People are like, you got to try my grandmother's lamb and rice, And so I would go over to Nana's house and cook. I tried to do some pre-qualification because, you don't want to go cook at grandma's house and then not include her book in your recipe. That's not nice. So, I got to make dushbara, which are these amazing Bukharin meat-filled tortellini-style pasta dumplings that go in a really rich meat broth with a woman named Doris Chaimov, who a Food World friend of mine referred me to, and I just knew that she was the OG, she was good, she knew what she was doing. I got to her house, she had a professional pasta sheeter in her house. Because she is the private caterer for an oligarch who will not be named on this stage, who's apparently not supposed to be living in Israel or lives in Israel. But so all this, everything came through a different source. Everyone has their own stories. My job when I'm at someone's house is I just assume that role of learner as opposed to what I do for a living. I assume I know nothing, and I just take notes and I watch and I offer to help. And in the case of these dushbara, I was really bad at forming the tortellini pasta. It took me a long time to make them, and she really enjoyed making fun of me, the professional cook that I didn't know. She's one of those pasta grannies, except she was really young. And also the lamb and rice, for instance, these 4 granddaughters of Nona who live in Herzliya, they were kind of begging me to do this because they wanted this recipe committed to paper, and we all know how hard it is to extract a recipe from a grandma. So I got to go in there and sort of be the buffer and spend the day cooking with this amazing grandmother, so elegant and so witty and sharp, and in the course of her cooking, she told me her whole family's story about growing up in Lebanon, in coastal Lebanon. I don't really think about a big Jewish community in Lebanon, and there really was one.
There was,
And her family owned a textile factory, and they loved living there, and they had a beautiful life until they were driven out by anti-Semitism in the 1960s. And this lamb and rice recipe, you guys, I tell you,
it's legit.
It's worth it. It's worth it. And she has her own version of baharat, which is a spice blend. But what I love is that now her granddaughters can have this book, and it's codified. It's codified. Exactly.
Adeena, before I open it up to some questions from our friends here in the audience, tell me how you imagine us using the book.
That's such a good question. My idea with Shabbat was to take the concept of Shabbat, which is the idea of elevating a table, whether that means with food or with a bit of spirituality or with sort of cutting out technology. There's something magical that happens when you invite people to your table. And growing up in my home, many of the people who were at our Shabbat table were not religious or not Jewish. And everyone wanted in on Shabbat. There's something special about it. So I wanted to imbue this book with that specialness, and I tell a lot of the family stories like that, but it's also just a bit of a chronicle of how I cook now in Israel. It's those meat dishes, but it's also all of my salads. There's a grilled steak salad with stone fruit and a grated tomato dressing. There's a salad that uses both young mango that's shredded in the style of a papaya salad and fresh juicy mango, and amba, which is a mango condiment, into a dressing. There are all kinds of soups, and there's a yogurt soup with garlic chips and cumin oil and chickpeas. There's a dilly chicken and rice soup. It's all these things could be served on Shabbat, but they also are just foods that anyone can put together into an amazing meal. And my only suggestion for people is to take a minute when you're cooking these dishes, and for the cook to slow down and have a moment also to sanctify your cooking, appreciate the ingredients, be grateful for the bounty, and do what you can do to enjoy yourself so that by the time you get to the table, you're in a position to enjoy hosting as well. So it's as much about the hospitality that I learned in my own home. My mother was a really incredible host, my father too. They were a great team. And I think that the book is imbued with that spirit of hospitality as much as it is about the recipes itself.
Yeah. I'd love to take some questions from the audience. We've got a microphone up here, so if anybody's got a question for Adeena, I think I see one back there, a hand back there, yeah.
Cooking questions are also welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. I have a question. I'm wondering, for those of us who value sort of the freshness of the ingredients that
Yeah.
you referenced before, but A, live here, and B, are busy working,
Yeah.
9 to 5s, I'm kind of wondering how you approach, like how often you do your shopping.
Sure, yeah.
And any tips, again, for those of us who live here, like how we can
Yeah.
shop in a way that maximizes that freshness.
Yeah, I mean, my general philosophy on recipes is that they're more guidelines than hard and fast rules. So, if you're making, even if you're making Israeli salad, okay, and you have you don't have a tomato, but maybe you have like an unripe nectarine, like chop that up and put it in your Israeli salad, like that'll be amazing. Use the things whatever you have that's the best, use that. I shop almost daily because I live 50 meters from the shuk. And, I'm aware that that's an incredible privilege. And, I always talk about like the chives, like living in New York, I love chives. And, it was always like this 6 chive handlebar of sad chives in a steamy plastic clamshell that were like already dead when you bought them, And in Israel, you just get amazingly robust herbs all the time. So
Yeah.
I would say, find a few like really fresh herbs and a few really vibrant vegetables and fruits and base your dishes. You can work backwards, It's like my recipes are there to inspire you, but it's as important to take what's the best that you have and use that. So that's, and also don't be afraid to substitute,
Persimmons, Michael Solomonov uses persimmons.
Michael uses persimmons, and in
Yeah,
and
instead
I
of tomatoes,
have in this book I make a condiment called schugachuri, which is kind of like a combination of schug, which is the Yemenite hot sauce, and the South American chimichurri, because I want to loosen the spiciness a little bit and make it more like a condiment that can be thrown on everything. So I marinate dark meat chicken thighs in the schugachuri, and then I make a persimmon avocado salsa instead of a
Yum.
mango salsa.
Yeah.
Because there were no, in Israel things are hyper seasonal. And, you say we get fresh things all the time, but we also can't get things whenever we want.
Yeah.
So blueberries, raspberries have a micro season. Stone fruit also is very short. So I tend to work with what I can get. And also I think having a CSA or a farm box is a great place to start, because that will inform what you decide to make that week, and use the index of the cookbook, to find the things that are fresh.
I would just add a plug to the Ferry Building Farmers Market.
Yeah.
It's one of the best farmers markets in the U.S. You guys
true.
get it every weekend here. Or in Marin, there's a great one in the South. Now you could just buy a few pints of cherry tomatoes, and that lasts the whole week.
Yeah, tomato season is late here this year, as
Very
Guy
late,
was
yeah.
telling me, and that's
Yeah.
such a boon for late. I mean, we're still basically in late summer earlier.
Yeah.
With climate change, we're still in late summer.
And I would add that a great dressing is just tahina with a little bit of water and salt to loosen it up, and just drizzle that over everything, and it's perfect.
Oh yes,
Right?
It is.
So good.
Trina, the mother sauce of
Yes.
Israeli cooking.
Next question over here.
Hi.
Hi.
So I know you come out here on occasion, but
Yes.
do you have a favorite restaurant in the Bay Area? And if not the Bay Area, do you have a favorite restaurant in California?
Israeli or anything? I'm gonna, since I don't live here and I hang out with my friends in the South Bay mostly when I'm here, I'm gonna defer to Guy because he's a restaurant
Oh my gosh.
expert.
I'm gonna get in trouble if I say my favorite.
And he's also a banging cook, so I'm waiting to get to his house and cook with him. But why don't you tell them some of your favorites?
The town of Sebastopol has amazing restaurants. It has a great Thai restaurant called Kam Loy. It has a great Georgian restaurant called Piala, a great ramen place called Ramen Gaijin. They're all really reasonably priced. Go up a great pizza place called Psychic Pie, Roman-style pizza. Literally, seriously, go to Sebastopol on a weekend and just go. Do you know those places? Yeah. No? Oh.
So now we'll see you all
Which
in
one?
Sebastopol next weekend.
What was your suggestion? No. Oh, nothing. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing we were talking about actually is that most first-tier cities in America have a lot of Israeli restaurants now, and Israel seems to have a dearth of good Israeli restaurants. So
You mean the Bay Area?
yeah, I'm sorry, the Bay
Bay
Area.
Area.
So I'm
Yeah,
curious
there are
why you
few.
think that is, and like, do you see that changing?
I mean, there are a few. I mean, LA has a bigger
LA
Israeli
has more,
community.
yeah.
So there are excellent, and many down there in
Yeah.
LA. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could speak to New York more or Israel, but not to San Francisco so much.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a picky Wow in the World fan.
Oh, okay.
What do you recommend in your book for kids who don't quite know Israeli flavors yet?
That's a good question.
Schnitzel.
Schnitzel is a really good one. I think, I mean, that's a little bit of a cop-out because it's more based on an Eastern European recipe. You know, someone asked this question about cooking with kids the other day, and like someone had a really good answer. Like, you have to sell it to your children.
Yeah.
Like, you got to be like, this is amazing, and you're gonna love this, and you just need to try it, as opposed to being like, oh, it might be too spicy, or it might be too this, or it might be too that. But I think, like some of my soups, like in Sababa, there's a really good orange soup that's like a blend of all different, like winter vegetables that are pureed with coconut milk. Kids
Yeah.
really love it. It's kind of like adult baby food. But, you know,
I'm telling you, my kids
yeah.
and I try it. Eggplant. So I grew up with baba ganoush, but hatzilim instead. So mayonnaise based. It sounds
Right.
weird.
So mayonnaise in eggplant is a big thing in Israel. I like it too.
Mashed roasted eggplant with
Yeah.
mayonnaise, garlic, some
Delicious.
cumin, salt.
Delicious.
It's amazing. It's like, try it.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
tahina, I feel like kids would like tahina. It's kind of like a peanut buttery flavor. There's this is not for kids, but like the first thing that everyone started making from the new book is the shaken tahina iced coffee.
Yeah.
It's just like cold
So
brew, maple syrup, and tahina that you shake with ice at home, and it makes it this creamy frappe
Yeah.
kind of a thing that feels dairy and really indulgent, but it's vegan and, you know, it's healthy because it has tahina in it.
Yeah. Yes.
But I mean, yeah, those are some suggestions.
Anybody else? Oh.
Hi, sorry, I can't stand up because I have a baby under here.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, baby.
First, I wanted to say thank you for coming. We loved your chicken recipe with all the spices from your other cookbook. It
The
was
shawarma one?
The shawarma
Pargio?
pargio.
Yes, it was like transformational in our house,
So
and we pair
good.
it with all of like the Deb Perlman street cart chicken toppings
Yeah.
and everything, and kind
Wonderful.
of combo two of my
Nice.
favorite cooks. So
Good.
thank you for
Oh,
that.
thank you.
The question that I have is about like the idea of Shabbat to me feels kind of overwhelming and like aspirational.
Sure.
When the reality of like Friday afternoon comes along and you've been working all week and you're like, let's just Uber Eats.
I'm totally with you.
So
totally with
what
you.
are like, and when you have kids running around, like what are like little things that you can do
Yeah.
to sort of introduce the feeling and the concept without like
Yeah.
cooking a whole meal and feeling overwhelmed by the task
Yeah.
of doing that?
I mean, I always say that like first of all, like the perfect Shabbat meal is the Shabbat meal that you have the time to make. So if that means that all you have time to make is like a roast chicken with potatoes and that's like amazing, that's a Shabbat meal in one dish. If you decide that you want to take on a multi-course endeavor, that's fine. But as far as, you know, I think in my house, like when we made kiddush over the wine or sang certain songs, like that just sort of put sort of like it elevated our table. And if it's whether it's the traditional songs or something that you guys decide, like maybe it's a reading or a poem or something that has meaning to you that would like bring a different energy to the table, like that to me is what a Shabbat table is about. It's about infusing the table with different energy.
And a really easy thing with
Yeah.
kids is just getting a challah. I mean, you
Yeah.
guys we're in one of the best bakery towns in America. And even if you just go to get a Whole Foods challah and they just rip it apart, and the next morning, I still do this for my kids and they're teenagers, challah French toast on
Oh, yeah.
Saturday morning. That's
Absolutely.
Shabbat to them.
You know, and I think, you know, introducing maybe, if you're Jewish, introducing one of the rituals, you know, of whether it's saying a blessing or, you know, doing something that ties you back to the tradition. And if you're not, like introducing some kind of tradition. But, you know, for me, you know, we like to, you know, make a blessing over wine. We're not religious, but like those rituals have meaning to us still, you know, and having them on the table. Also, it connects me with my parents and my grandparents and people that were really important to me. But I really feel that it's very important with Shabbat to go into it feeling as rested as possible, you know? So like maybe that's what you do. Maybe you don't make dinner and you rest.
Yeah.
And that would be a great Shabbat for you. And I endorse that 100%.
We have time for we have time for one more.
We're going to take one more question. I just want to remind everybody that we're going to have a signing immediately afterwards in the atrium. Adeena is going to be signing. You can have photos.
And there are extra books to
And there
buy.
are extra
if
books
you
for
want.
sale if you want to buy. It makes a great Hanukkah present. And also, I wanted to let you know we have a little surprise for you. Our good friend Lisa Kirby, who is a home chef, she also works for Acme Breads, which is why I mentioned it in the beginning. She's prepared several of Adeena's recipes from the book for you to taste and to try in the atrium. So stay.
And I
so-
just want to thank you, Guy, for doing this.
Oh my
I know you
gosh.
get asked to do these things
Are
a
you kidding
1,000
me?
times a year, and I'm so grateful and honored that you shared the stage with me. And thank you so much. It was such a privilege and so much fun. So thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last question in the back.
Hey, Adeena.
Hi.
Hi. So you mentioned how Israelis take so much pride in their ingredients,
Yeah.
and that's just a shared across the board
Uh-huh.
piece. And I was wondering, having first met you in New York and the beginning of that journey for you, if your food values changed when you moved to Israel.
That's a good question. I think I definitely focus more on seasonality than I did when I was living, even though I had access to farmers markets. I think that I'm more aware of the origins of my food because I live in a smaller food ecosystem. So I wouldn't say that it's values that I took on, but like by osmosis, like I kind of know a lot more where my ingredients came from, whether it's a farmer or a tahina producer or a winemaker or the olive oil press guy, you know, like, so that to me has been like a lovely and connecting result of living in Israel. And I think that that is a food value that has really changed me in the way that I think about food. And so like when I come to California, like I really recommend, I don't recommend using Israeli olive oil. I recommend using California olive oil because you have access to incredible first cold pressed local oils that go the best with the local cuisine, you know, so like that's a value that I would, if I moved back from Israel to here right now, I would be looking for the things that I could find that were from here, you know, of course I might, so those are some of the values that I have absorbed living over there.
And again, we're very lucky to be able to live in a place where we have access to pretty much everything that is in this book.
I would say one other food value that I have adapted living in Israel is I've dropped the need for perfection.
Yeah.
Like Israelis are really good at like exposing their kitchen, their messy kitchen and their unfinished dinner to you, the guests. And it's very freeing to not have to be so buttoned up when people come over, and to like have a social contract of spontaneity and sharing in the process. And so I think Americans are much more concerned with everything being done, you know, and with the kitchen being clean when the time, and those are values that I have dropped and replaced with a sort of more of a self-acceptance of whatever state my kitchen is in at that moment when people are coming over. And sometimes by design, because I think people like to be part of the mess. They like to help. They like to help finish. They like to see, how the sausage gets made. So that's another thing.
All right, I'm inspired to have more informal dinner parties and cook with this book. I already have cooked it because I got an advance copy, so thank you. It's such an awesome book, guys. Adeena, you're the best. So great seeing you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank
and
you.
Adeena will see you outside.
Thank you. That was fun.